what's known as pre-filed testimony along with other attachments and exhibits.
Yes, I did.
And if we were to walk through each and every one of those questions and answers in your pre-filed testimony, would the answers you give here today be substantially similar?
It'd be similar, yes.
And do you have any material updates or corrections that you believe are necessary to make?
I have some updates.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the first one was, it's kind of embarrassing, but I just realized Saturday that the parcel affects an existing CRP contract I have on my farm. And as I understand, that means it avoids the contract. I'm in the 9th year of a 10-year contract. And what that means is I have to pay them back 9 years payment for that. And so that's a significant hardship. The next thing I'd like to talk about, I just became aware of, there's like 13 water permit being requested what they're used for is to cool the CO2 as it leaves the ethanol plants. And there are just incredible amounts of water. One is like 56 million. That one's approved. The second one I know about is like 28 million. And that one's in process. But like I grew up in the 50s, I remember Dad driving to town to get water to water the cattle with. That was 56, I believe. And so I know that water supply is scarce, and with the drought is getting more scarce. It's a real concern that they would use the water for that versus more important reasons. The next thing I became aware of is that PHMSA issued a ruling, I think it was mid-September, and it said that the local governments have the jurisdiction for routing. And that's important because we have been trying to get, like my county, to issue regulations like for setback distance, etc., where they would control where the pipeline goes. And they've been intimidated by the threat of lawsuit to enact those regulations. So I think they should delay this hearing until those counties have time to reconsider the use of establish those regulations. And then I have, hopefully get into it later, but I have quite a list of what I believe to be serious safety concerns about these pipelines.
And sir, what I'd like to do is offer your pre-filed testimony, and then I understand you also caused to be filed some hearing exhibits that might relate to some of those concerns. So
yes.
I would offer exhibits 444 through 453, 467, 468, 482, 500 through 502, 504 through 505, and lastly 623.
Did you say 505 through 623?
If I did, I didn't mean that. 504 through 505, period, and also offer 623.
Are there objections?
Provided this is the pre-filed testimony as well as attachments 1 through 40, and then number 623, there is no objection.
Correct. It's his attachments and then the hearing exhibits.
Is that confirmation sufficient then? No objection?
Yes, that's sufficient. No objection.
Okay. With no objection, then the board will admit and give the weight due.
And then, sir, you've I think been here a few days, so I tender you for cross and perhaps some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the CR Club. Mm-hmm. Have you dealt at all with Summit's land agents or any representatives of Summit?
No. The first notice I got from them was, I think, 16 August. Yeah. Where I got a mailing from them.
Of what year?
Oh, 21. Sorry. And 25 August of 21, I got the first request from Summit to allow surveying on my land, which I didn't want to do, so I didn't return it. The first offer I got from them was 19 April 22, and just for the record, the offer was like maybe 2% of my land value, and you heard other people talk about the value of the land being 25%, so it's maybe a tenth of what the land value drops, so it was nothing you'd even consider. From August, I knew nothing about sequestration pipelines, so I read every article I could. I read Stephen Kunin's Unsettled, which is an excellent book, but I did all my research and decided I wasn't interested in signing anything. So it was the 6th of January, I sent a letter to Summit saying, don't talk to me, talk to my lawyer, Mr. Jorde. Since that time, I received 15 phone calls from Summit. Like so many people, I get so many junk calls. Unless I know the number, I don't answer it, so I didn't answer them. But there was at least 15 times they called and left a message. I don't know how many times they called and didn't leave a message. We've got the property in western Iowa, southern Iowa, and we live in Wisconsin. So we travel a lot. So there was at least 3, maybe 4 visits that came. His card said Alexandria, Minnesota, so that's quite a drive. But 4 times they were on my property and left information. And then the last one, it was in the spring sometime because I still had my coveralls on. I actually met the guy, and he introduced himself. And I said I wasn't interested and asked him to leave. And I mean, he wasn't rude and I wasn't rude, but it took about 10 minutes for him to finally leave. So that's been my interaction with Summit.
So is it fair to say you've never really had a discussion with any Summit land agent?
That's true.
During what contacts you did have, did they mention eminent domain?
No, I did go back and check all the 15 recorded phone calls, and there wasn't any specific reference to eminent domain. They did make tangential references, like there's no alternate route, so if you don't do this, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what they did.
You mentioned the survey. So did they ever survey your property?
We live 4 hours away, and there's nobody, no close neighbors. I have no idea. I know that I never gave anybody permission to go on the land, but I don't know.
Did they send you a written notice that they were going to survey?
No.
In your preliminary comments, you mentioned the 13 water withdrawal permits that Summit is, or Summit's affiliate is requesting. Is there one in Cherokee County that would impact your property?
Not Cherokee, but Galva, which is a little bit south of the town we grew up in. So that'd be the closest one, and then there's one in, I think it was Marcus. So there's one on either side of my pipeline.
Okay. And so why do you think that would impact your property?
Oh, because it lowers the water level, and it's already a scarce commodity. And it's one thing to take the water and use it wisely. It's another one to just pump it out of the ground to cool something and dump the heated water back in. And where does that water go? And it takes 500 to 1,000 years for water to go back through down the limestone to get to the aquifer. We took a vacation out to Kansas, and you get kind of bored driving through Kansas. And there was a thing it was the world's largest hand-dug well in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. And they did it back in late 1800s. And they did it because of steam locomotives, and steam locomotives need water to make steam. So they had to have stops to get water. So they dug this long, deep well to provide water for locomotives. And they had 2 major lines going through because of that. But the importance of that is that you go down to this well and you see where the water level was 1880, and you see where it is now. And then he had a map of the whole, I think it's Ogallala Aquifer, how much that aquifer has been drawn down. And I came away thinking, boy, I'm glad that's Kansas and not Iowa. But now that they're going to do the same thing in Iowa, so that scares me a lot.
Also, in your preliminary comments, you mentioned that you now understand you have some CRP
Yes.
ground, and if that might impact your interest in your land. Can you explain that in a little more detail?
Can you show the KMZ?
Sure. I guess I shouldn't say that. It's up to the staff.
Let me see here. Oh, here we go. Maybe. Does that work? I'll try not to shine it in your eye. Okay.
There you go.
All right. So it doesn't show up so well on this one. The picture I had was a different year, but that's my parcel there. And ma'am, does this hurt your eyes if I? Okay, I didn't want to blind you. So you see this little corner right there?
That's the southwest corner of your property?
Correct. And that land is all CRP. And like I said, I'm in the 9th year of a 10-year contract. And the way I understand it, they take the area that would be affected by that and they prorate the payments they made me for the last 9 years, and I'd have to return that, and it's government, so it'd be with interest. So that's the CRP land that I'm worried about.
So even if the pipeline doesn't actually cross the CRP land, it would still affect your CRP status?
Oh yes, because part of the easement is they can go anywhere they want on that parcel at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And when I was trying to figure out what to do with this pipeline, I did call the FSA office, and I was considering, what if I put the adjoining land in CRP? Can I do that? And she said, absolutely not, because during nesting season, you can't drive on CRP ground, and we have a company that can do it anytime they want. So I can't put CRP on any of that parcel.
And the KMZ map shows the route of the pipeline. Is that where you always understood the route would be?
You know, they sent different scales, and it was kind of hard to tell. At one time, I thought it was further up, which would have been a little bit less of an impact for me. But then, at least the later ones, this is the route in the later ones. And maybe this is a good time just to give an overview of the land where my dad bought the land in 1950, and originally it was 200 acres. So there's an 80-acre parcel to the east. So in 1950, so it's been a family for 73 years. So the 1980s were tough. So Dad sold off this acreage, that's the farm buildings from the farm, to a nice couple. They were always just so nice to Mom and Dad, and they were always good to me. The wife still lives there. She lost her husband a few years ago. She's in her 80s now, and she lives there alone. But the relevance is that as part of that acreage, the farm well is right there, if you can get that with the hand on your cursor.
So the well would be on the north edge of your property?
That's correct. Yeah. And then the water line goes diagonally down and then under the road to the house there.
And about how far is that house from the pipeline route, you know?
I scaled that, and I got about 500 feet.
Okay.
You'd be welcome if you could check that for me.
Okay. Is that a concern?
Oh, that's very much a concern, because I watched the DNV video. It was a test rupture in Norway, an 8-inch pipe. And I scaled that, and it took about 30 seconds for the leading edge of the cloud to travel 500 feet. So her name's Shirley, she would have 30 seconds from the time of the rupture to get up, get dressed, go to the remote and it's not an attached garage, get in her car. If it starts, she'd have to drive into the cloud. And I mean, the interior of that cloud's got to be like driving into a fog bank. And this is the kinetic phase of the rupture, so it's highly concentrated CO2. Her car's not going to run, and it's kind of hard to say this in a nice way, but she's not going to survive it. She's, and then the 500 feet. I did the calculations for the volume of CO2 for a 20-mile distance, 12-inch lines. This easement said they can go up to 24, but the last I saw was 12-inch. But for a 12-inch line, 20 miles long, that's like 620,000 gallons of liquid phase or dense phase CO2. And that expands by a factor of 535. And if you do the math, that comes out with a cloud 10 foot high, but 2,400 feet in diameter. So it would go 1,200 feet from that center of the pipeline. So, I mean, if that's 500, 1,200 is out there. I mean, she doesn't have a chance.
The 20 feet that you mentioned, is that the distance between the shut-off valves?
The 20 miles between shut-off valves?
The 20 miles, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I understand. I don't know for sure where the pumping stations are located, but it's 20 miles, what they say.
Okay. Where would the nearest emergency response personnel come from?
Okay. The closest emergency response would be Quimby, and it's a town of 246 people. It's about 3 miles distance-wise, but 46 people. It's volunteer. They all have jobs and stuff, so it'd be probably 20 minutes. Who knows? I've worked with them before. I had them do I have to have prescribed burns on my other CRP land, and so I had the fire department come by and make sure that the fire didn't spread when we burned it. So they're really good. But so 20 minutes for them to respond. Triage care, which is the next level, would be Cherokee, and that's about 20 minutes away. And then if you wanted, serious care, it'd be Sioux City, and that's about an hour away. And just to finish that, I talked to the fire chief, who's also the head of the emergency response team. Very nice guy, but I asked him if he'd been contacted by Summit. He said no. I asked if he had any training about CO2. He said no. I asked if he had any electric vehicles. He said no. And any hazmat suits, self-contained breathing, and no. And he was very curious about the CO2, but it was clear that he didn't understand the pipelines and the potential dangers they serve. And the other thing is the pipeline crosses within a half mile of the city limits of Quimby. So something goes there, they're in trouble.
Okay. Was that the Quimby fire chief you were talking to?
Correct, yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Ms. Ryan?
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Taylor asked most of the things I was going to ask, so I only have a few things for you.
Okay.
With respect to the well, do you know, did any of the offers from Summit include any special construction or protection that they would take to,
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And so you're the second generation, correct?
Yes, correct.
And did you have plans to pass this on to another?
I did. That's how the trust is set up. But like so many people have testified, you can't get liability insurance. I tried for six months with the first company to get a definite yes or no. And, insurance agents, being insurance agents, they're hard to pin down. But if you read the policy, it very clearly says they do not cover a pollutant release either on my property or on adjoining property. So if that would rupture, you saw how close it is to the neighbor. There's going to be a lawsuit, and nobody sues for just $1 million. That standard umbrella policy. So then, I'm bankrupt because they can go after my other assets. So I can't really pass that that kind of unlimited liability, uninsurable, onto my kids in good faith. It's like leaving a box of rattlesnakes for them or something. You just can't do that. So I don't know what I'm going to do with the land. I don't know if I sell it. I mean, you've heard testimony, the land value is reduced 25%. So, I mean, that's awful. And I bought it long enough ago. My cost basis on the farm is real low, so I'll just get, killed by capital gains, and it's just a tremendous financial loss. And I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place. And every morning I wake up at 3 o'clock and try and think of a way to get out of the box, and I just can't come up with one yet.
Thank you. You also answered all my follow-up questions in that answer, so
Okay.
that's all I had. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hayek?
Hello, Mr. Johannsen. I'm Chris
Oh,
Hike.
you're
I'm a
over here.
landowner. It's okay. Just a quick question. So do you see a public use or a project benefit out of this?
No, I do a lot of thinking about what's in it for me, and one of the things they talk about is climate change. I'm supposed to feel good because I'm saving the climate. So I've done work, and if I take the human CO2 production is about 5% of natural, so 5%. If I take that and use that number and take the amount that Summit's going to bury, they say forever, and it comes out like 0.016%, something like that. So it's minuscule. So I mean, it's so small it doesn't matter. It's like, say, if you're on a 5,000 calorie a day diet, and the doctor says lose weight, you take that same percentage times 5,000 calories, it's like 4,999.4. So is 1 calorie out of 5,000 going to make you lose weight? No. Is 18 million tons? It's a huge amount, but it's just so small. The production of CO2 is immense. So like China, about rough numbers, about a third of all human-made production or CO2 production, they make a third of it. So if you take what they're burying and that amount, 18 million tons, it takes China 4 hours to produce that amount. So they're taking my land for eternity, turning it from an asset to a liability. I can't pass it on to my sons. And the justification is it saves 4 hours of China production. And China's got like, I think, 250 coal-fired plants that are coming to bring online. So their rate's only going to increase. And it's just, it's a concept that just doesn't work. I've read probably 10 articles. I've read the book Unsettled, and they all have the same conclusion. It's interesting because it's not just the left or the right, or there's all kinds of fringe, but you have like the John Birch Society and the Sierra Club agreeing that sequestration is the answer. I think you can probably take it to the bank that it's not the answer. And then as far as the ethanol part goes, I'm sure you read the news, but the Biden administration just proposed 2032 CAFE corporate average fuel efficiency standards, and it's pushing like 70 miles a gallon. And what that essentially does is saying that internal combustion engines aren't going to be allowed. And if you burn diesel fuel, you get CO2. You burn gasoline, you get CO2. If you burn ethanol, you get CO2. And if that isn't the death knell, I got California and I think 9 other states right now that 2035 is the cutoff date for internal combustion engines. So clearly ethanol is, unless something really changed, it's on its death knell for it. And to maybe breathe life for maybe 2 years to an industry that it makes no sense to take my property for eternity for maybe 2 years of minimal benefit. And even the concept, I mean, they get like a few cents more a bushel for corn. You look at the the big picture of that for farmers, it's not significant. And to say that that trickles down through the communities, that, you know, it's going to help the average people, the impact's going to be minuscule. And I just, sorry, Mr. Ethanol, but I just don't buy it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Ms. Coles?
Good morning, Mr. Johannsen, Jean Colas Family Farms. I'm also at Cherokee County, around
good.
the Marcus in Claycorn area.
Oh, good. Yeah, I had relatives up that way.
So, do you believe that this pipeline is for the public's use or benefit?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
This is addressed extensively at pages 30 and 31 of the witness's testimony. It was also the question just asked by the previous questioner.
Ms. Coles, do you have a response?
Well, I'm doing my best. Would you please bring up the CRP map again? You obviously have several terraces going through the pipeline.
Yes, and that's important. My dad was, he believed in contour farming and strip farming, and he was a pioneer when they did minimum till. This is back in the early 70s when herbicides didn't work like they should, and you had to have mechanical cultivation. And he had some tough years with minimum till, but he eventually got it down. But anyway, the terraces on the southwest corner, those are they're pretty big structures. And if I look at the whole farm, it's classified as highly erodible. And they call it highly erodible because it is. And I found that out the hard way, because when I started contract farming this in 2014, the condition of the terraces in the southwest corner were pretty bad. And I won't say every year, but probably every other year for probably 6 or 8 years, I had to have follow-up work to do the terraces and get them in condition. I finally got them in pretty good condition. But if you look at the route of the pipeline, as a farmer, I mean, that goes right uphill, and you just never farm that way. So my first concern is you talk about tile lines. There's some old tile lines there, and their location's been lost to posterity. I have no idea where those are. There's some tile lines down here, put in probably around the year 2000. Unfortunately, the person I trusted to keep those records didn't do a very good job, so I don't know where they are either. So the first concern is tile lines. The next one, you see it crosses, and there's another one down here, it doesn't show up there, but it crosses 3 terraces. And I know from experience that it's going to take several years of follow-up to repair the damage done going to those terraces. The next concern is, if you see it goes down through here, and that's a pretty serious long hill. I mean, it's a long run for water. So as the water would come down, it would cross the pipeline. And I mean, no matter how good a job they do backfilling the trench, it's going to be a low area, and that's going to collect the water, and it's going to funnel it down there. And that lower eastern corner always has been a problem with corrosion, and so that's going to make it worse. And then we talked about the pumping stations, where you have to compress it. That adds heat to the CO2, so someone has stated that it leaves the pumping station as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll cool down as it goes through, but it's clear that the temperature of the pipeline will be greater than the ambient soil temperature. So what that means is the soil over that pipe will be the last one to freeze in the winter and the first one to thaw in the spring. And there's no crop on it at that time, so that just makes the erosion problem worse. And then just talking about the route of the pipeline, I don't think in good conscience I can ask people to cross over that. It's contract, and it's not me doing it, but I can't ask somebody else to do it. So the only way I can think of is to seed down that entire area over the top and not cross the pipeline. And then what that means, my dad used to call them point rows, but you know, down here, and particularly with the large equipment, that's going to be really hard to farm. Entryway to the farm, there's one there, one by the well. So that they're all on the, call it the upper right-hand corner of the pipeline route. The other one is over the far, the northwestern corner, and that's up a steep hill, and it'd be hard to get equipment up and down that. So it's going to make it more difficult to farm. And we talked about the plume, or not plume, it's a kinetic cloud as it comes from that. I did calculations trying to see what, just because I've heard some that say it's like opening a can of soda. And so I did calculations of the stored energy in a 20-mile long pipe at 2,300 PSI. And it comes out like 40,000 pounds of TNT. I mean, it's just astronomical. And to be fair about that, I didn't know how to handle the phase change from supercritical to gas. Like if it's water, you got the latent heat of vaporization and the latent heat of fusion, so you can do the phase change and calculate the energy. But I didn't know how to handle that with the CO2. So the equation I used, that just assumes it's a gaseous state all the way through. And then I did traditional gas loss, PV over T. And if I do that calculation, I would calculate an expansion rate of 164. And if you do the research, the actual one is 535. So it takes extra energy to compress it that additional amount. So my 40,000 pounds of CO2 is very conservative. So that's the amount of stored energy available if you reduce it or release it instantaneously. So then the next question is, well, how big is the rupture opening? So I looked at the CO2 phase diagram, and if you follow that down, you get 2,300 PSI, and you go down to 1 atmosphere, 14.7 PSI. Turns out it comes out at like negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 100. I mean, it's really cold. And that caught my attention because there's a property of steel known as the nil ductility transition temperature, November Delta Tango Tango. So nil ductility transfer temperature. And what that is, if you pop impact resistance, I don't know who I'm talking to here, but impact resistance versus temperature, you have, as it comes down from upper temperatures to room temperatures, you hit a shelf and then it drops drastically and then levels off again. And what that drop off means is instead of failing in a ductile manner, so like tears and yields, and it's kind of a more gentle failure, at the lower limit, it's like glass and it just shatters. And in school, they said that the rate of crack growth is like speed of sound, so 1,100 feet a second. So what that means is it's an instantaneous, almost instantaneous failure. And the classic example they used that in school was like the Liberty ships they built in World War II, where Henry Kaiser was trying to upgrade the production rate. And he did a great job there, building the ship like every 40 days. But everything was going great until he started doing convoys in the North Atlantic. And then he learned the hard way that the steel in the hulls had a transition temperature that was greater than the ambient. So what that means is when you weld, there's always flaws, stops and starts, flaws, inclusions, you get slag. Those are all stress concentrations. And then what happens is you go through the waves, it's bending, alternate compression and tension, and you get a crack going, and if you're below that temperature, 1,100 feet a second, the ship cracks in two. And that's a bad thing in the North Atlantic. So that's the real implications of a brittle fracture. So then I said, okay, does that exist in pipelines?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
I'm going to object to the lengthy narrative response is unresponsive to the question, which was, you have terraces on your property, don't you?
I would have to go back and see what the question is. It was You obviously have several terraces going through your pipeline. Ms. Colas,
I have another question.
thank you.
What is, you mentioned the plume impact area. Can you please bring up a KMZ map that expands that so we can see what he was referring to?
So for,
Expand it more. He indicated, I think it was more than his parcel that was affected, please.
yeah, so a cloud, the kinetic phase of the rupture, the cloud would be 2,400 feet in diameter. So that would go 1,200 feet on this side, 1,200 feet on that side. And the easement said they can go up to 24 inches. And a 24-inch pipe would have twice that. So it's 2,400 feet to one side and 24 feet to the other side. So almost a mile-wide band across the whole length of the, 2,400 feet for the 12-inch pipe. And I feel good about the 1,200 feet because I did the same calculation on an 8-inch, and that comes out 1,600 feet. And on the South Dakota, I can't call it a plume map or dispersion map. They just showed a width of 1,855 feet over the pipeline route. So that's 927.5 feet on each side. I had 800. Mine was just the cloud. They used, I think, it was 40,000 ppm. So they allow for some dispersion. So that'd be a little bit greater than mine. So I'm pretty comfortable that it'd be 1,200 feet on either side.
You were mentioning wells on the property in other areas and concern. Do you feel they might be contaminated?
Yeah, it's, the well is not very good with this. Right there, this is higher ground than that, so it would flow down from that. And then, of course, the pipeline, the water line runs kind of parallel to the pipeline. So, yeah, the contamination issue I'd be concerned about.
And concern for your 80-year-old neighbor, because she obviously has wells too on her property.
No, that's the well she gets her water from.
Okay.
So that's the concern. And again, I'd be liable for that.
Do you have concern that Summit has never operated a pipeline before?
That is one of my biggest concerns, because if I would have been allowed to finish the thing on the brittle rupture, it turns out that there are ways to address the brittle fracture, but it would require, they call them crack arresters, like every 5 feet. So if you do the math, there's 5,280 feet in a mile, and at 5-foot spacing, it'd be 1,000 per mile. So 2,200 miles of pipeline is 2,200,000 crack arresters, and there's not a corporate accountant in the world that approved that. So the crack arresters are not for the safety of the bystanders. What the crack arresters do is that they quantify the amount of pipeline they're going to have to dig up and replace in the event of a rupture. So I came away at the conclusion that if it was an experienced company that had decades of experience with this, they could maybe come up with a pipeline that would work, but they would do statistical analysis, and they'd say, okay, we expect the pipeline to last 50 years. So what are the chances of this pipeline rupturing in 50 years? What's the damage it's going to do? And is that an acceptable risk? So that's what an established company would do. So now I go to Summit. They've never built a pipeline before in their life. They're building a hazardous pipeline, but not one that they've already know about. It's a sequestration pipeline, which is new to the industry. There's no PHMSA guidelines, and they're going to do it in record time. They told the audience at the Floyd County meeting that they were going to start construction the spring of 2024 and be operational in 2024. So if you do the math, 9 months, 24 hours a day, wet or dry, hot or cold, regardless, they got to do 8 miles a day. So they have 5 work crews. That's like 1.6 miles each one would have to do a day. And they told Mr. Cummings that they can do 1.5 miles a day. So that seems like what they're going to do. And so it's not like you're going to take your time and really do a good job. It's a mad dash to get this done. And for a company that's never built a pipeline before in their history, that's a real concern to me. And we talked about the statistical thing. So like an established company would say, okay, I got a risk for 50 years. If Summit would sell the line in 5 years, then that equation changes a lot. Is the rupture going to occur in 5 years? And we're a limited liability firm. Can we absorb that loss if it does happen? And that's an entirely different equation. And that scares me a lot because that appears to be what the plans are.
Are you aware that PHMSA is currently evaluating CO2 pipelines and safety and setting up new guidelines?
Yes, I went to I think it was the last day of May and 1st of June. It was a 2-day session, and we sat up until like the 3 o'clock the last day when they're doing the rescue squad stuff. But what I wanted to hear from PHMSA was that, listen, we know these are new, but we've evaluated the old standards, and if we apply those to sequestration pipelines, we're confident that they'll be safe. And I listened very carefully for that for 2 days. Not once did PHMSA say that. They brought panel after panel up, and each one said, okay, we're gonna do this study, this study, this study, and this study. And then we'll evaluate the results and we'll incorporate them into our new standards. And I asked the question, I said, okay, they're gonna start construction this spring. They ordered the pipe. How in the world are they going to incorporate any new updates of design standards if the parts are already ordered? And I just got a deer in the headlight response. So I know they're working on them. They're a long ways away from them. And in any case, they plan to build it without them, banking on the grandfather clause. And if it's in the ground, that they don't apply anymore.
That's, just a minute. I'm emotional here. Do you think that this pipeline construction should even be considered until PHMSA sends out submits the new regulations?
Oh,
That it
absolutely.
should be stopped?
Objection.
State the objection.
This is explained extensively at pages 50 and 51 of the witness's pre-filed testimony.
Ms. Colas?
Sorry, I don't have access to that information, but I felt it was very important.
I believe all of that pre-filed information is already in the docket.
I'm not a lawyer. Okay, is there any other concern you have related to the safety of the pipeline?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
This witness's pre-filed testimony is extensive in addressing his concerns about the safety and other features of the pipeline and the easement. In addition, I would note that's simply not a cross-examination question to ask somebody to list any other concerns they have.
Ms. Colas?
I'm not a lawyer, but I am a landowner that cares. No further questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? The board member Burns has some questions.
Could we go back to KMZ map, please? So just so we're straight on the record here, so that well is located almost central of the northern parcel, correct?
Of the parcel, yes.
Okay.
In the farm goes further to the west, but for this parcel, yes.
Okay. And then I want to take care of this on break, but my court reporting live view is not working, so we'll have to talk about that later. How many gallons do you say that the permits were applied for?
The total for all 13 plants, I think, was like 478 million. Yeah. All 13 was 478. The Lawler plant was 55.9. The Goldfield plant was 27.6. And the other ones, I tried Googling and I couldn't find the gallon amounts for the other 11 plants.
And then this parcel land, because I believe you earlier stated you live in Wisconsin, but have you ever farmed this parcel yourself, or has it always been rented out?
Only as a kid growing up where I went to college, but no, there's no buildings to store farm equipment on, and just the 4 hours. So no, I'd help my brother when he was farming it, but no, never solely.
And then if we zoom out a little bit and to the east, can you describe, I'm assuming this is a rather good-sized cattle lot, is that correct?
Yeah.
Any idea how many cattle may be there?
That I don't know. 4 hours away, I'm not very intimate with the neighbors now. And I mean, even the family names have changed over the years. So you go back, it's true. You can never go home again.
So you talked a little bit about concerns over the well and stuff. Just out of curiosity, would this cattle facility, what looks to have quite a bit of exposed manure piles, would that give you any concerns over water quality in your well?
Yeah, not me personally, but that is lower, so it wouldn't drain towards mine. So it wouldn't be an immediate concern, but certainly for somebody else it would be.
And then you talked about the liability concerns that you have. And so you talked a little bit too about the plume study and things like that. Do you ever think there's any drift from the chemicals used on your farm by the tenant?
Yes, but that's gotten so much better lately that it's not nearly a concern it used to be. You're talking about the airborne spray?
Correct.
Yeah, no, they do a much better job of that now than they used to. Still have to watch it, but.
So do you know, do MSDS or SDS sheets, you're aware of what those are, correct? Safety data sheets with chemicals and stuff?
Yeah, yes.
Do you know, would your tenant provide those sheets or any of the information the chemicals are used to that 80-year-old individual that lives in that parcel right next?
So I don't rent it out, I contract farm it, okay. But I could ask my farm agent to get that if you'd want it.
Would that provide you with any liability concerns of the chemical or the chemical drift to that neighbor?
I think technically she probably could, but that'd be true for every person that lives in the country, right?
I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from the parties? Mr. Jorde on redirect.
Yes, thank you. I just want to correct something here, I think. You had said that the John Birch Society and the Sierra Club both agree on sequestering carbon, but I think you meant that not sequestering carbon.
Yes,
right?
They both think it's a bad idea. Not just a bad idea, but a very bad idea.
And then in terms of, you said that you told Summit to talk to your lawyer, mm-hmm. right? And that they kept contacting you thereafter, yes. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't respect your wishes then, and that kind of cement in your mind a lack of trust and lack of confidence that they'll be able to do anything else right.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples of that. Like we mentioned the Floyd County, where they said they'll start construction the spring of 24 and be in operation the end of 2024. So like a few days before, the North Dakota permit was denied, and Mr. Powell stated that rerouting the line would take an additional 2 years. So he says 2 years, and then, a few days later, somebody else from Summit says we're going to have it running in less than a year. Right. And even just, my experience in industry, I mean, you have a project and you list out the guidelines, and like they say, they got pipe ordered, but how in the world can you order that much material if you don't have the water permits in place? Because that's absolutely essential to cooling the CO2 before they can inject it into the line. So if you don't have the water permits, the whole concept blows up. And I don't understand how a company could make those decisions. So that kind of shakes my confidence in Summit's decision-making ability. And there's numerous other times where they say things where my confidence in Summit is just extremely low.
And in terms of your concerns about the water withdrawal from the Ogallala Aquifer, you understand the Ogallala Aquifer is also under Nebraska, and they want to take water from Nebraska as well.
Yeah.
Okay. You understand it's all
huge.
connected, right?
It's all connected, and it takes thousands of years to fill it, and we're exhausting at a rate far higher than it gets replenished.
And then you had said that they may not have typically, this being Summit, or specifically said the word eminent domain, but they said basically there's no other option.
Right.
All right. And so you took that to be, it's our way or the highway.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I got the easement agreement, and I read through it, and it's like, this is over my head. I need a lawyer to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. And like for the, I understood the part about they needed access to the easement, but it only recently dawned on me that they have access to the whole parcel. And I missed that in my reading, and that's critical, because that means I can't put the land in CRP, and, et cetera.
In terms of your kind of thought process of not wanting people to cross the pipeline if it's put in place, not wanting to subject folks to potential life-threatening hazards, you would actually make the decision to take productive farm ground out of production. Is that right?
Yes, I don't see any way around it. We talked about the 100,000-pound combine, and if there's a rut and it goes in a rut, then you get an impact factor of at least 2 or 3. So instead of 100,000, all of a sudden it's 200,000, and maybe even a little bit more than that. And what's his name, Mr. Chauvenac? I think that's right, if I'm pronouncing that right. I think you asked him what the load rating was over a pipe buried 4 foot deep, and he said he didn't know, which I think that's I'm just shocked that the person responsible for construction doesn't know that number, but say he doesn't. But on mine, especially down towards the bottom, where it's going to erode over the top, it's going to be, 2 foot over the pipe. It's 4 foot deep, and then you subject 200,000 pounds on top of that. And the other thing we haven't talked about is carbonic acid, where if you inject water into the pipeline, it's going to form carbonic acid, which is highly corrosive, and that's going to take time. So it's going to erode the integrity of the pipe. So maybe just driving over the top of it can cause a rupture, and it's just a chance I can't take.
In terms of that feedlot that's nearby and chemicals, do you think it's a wise idea to introduce more risk to areas where there might already be some risk?
No, I mean, it's crazy.
And you said, sir, that at 3 a.m. you wake up, and I think your quote was to think about how to get out of this box. You understand that the 3 individuals up here could get you and all folks opposed to this out of the box by simply rejecting the eminent domain request and or rejecting the pipeline outright, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's I talk about my study, or if you go 12 1,200 feet either side of that pipeline, and we've seen KMZ after KMZ that there's always somebody close by. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people's lives at risk with this pipeline. And to take that kind of risk for offset 4 hours of China production, it's just not a good risk to take. My dad used to say, only a fool takes a risk he doesn't have to take. This is a risk we don't have to take. It does no good.
And Iowa doesn't have to be fools. Iowa doesn't have to be fools.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you. Excuse Mr. Johannsen. Mr. Jorde, your next witness.
Yep, Mr. Craig Woodward.